Hi, Jeremy here with MathomBooks. Today is Tolkien Talk number 1. This is going to be a very special and new series that I'm going to continue. Hope you guys are excited about this. I know I am. Here goes. In this video, in this first Tolkien Talk, I want to do a few things. First off, I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I'm what I call a Tolkien enthusiast, otherwise known as just a Tolkien geek. I'll tell you a bit about that. I also want to tell you a beautiful love story. So stick around for that, you lovebirds. Third, I want to talk to you about why I'm doing this in the sense that what makes me qualified to do this, if qualified is the right word. I'm going to show you all the Tolkien books and Tolkien-related things that I've read, and that'll be fun for you. Probably see a lot of books you haven't seen before. And fourth, I'm going to close out this video by giving you my opinion as to what order you should read the Tolkien books in. We know the major works are a book called The Silmarillion, The Hobbit, and then The Lord of the Rings. Some people say, oh, you should start with The Silmarillion and then read The Hobbit and then read Lord of the Rings. Other people have different ideas. I'm going to give you guys my ideas on that at the end of this video. Also, and most importantly, I want to field questions from you guys. I know a lot of people out there just don't know very much about Tolkien. In some ways, he's a mysterious figure. There's a lot of what I see as misinformation about Tolkien out there. I see it all the time. You know, people with they're well-intended and they hear something somewhere or see something on the internet and they think it's true. And so there's a lot of facts about Tolkien that get floated around. About Middle-earth and his writings and all that just aren't really true. If you have any questions about Tolkien, about The Lord of the Rings, about his publication, about The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, any of those sorts of questions, I would love for you to leave those questions in the comments down below, and in future Tolkien Talk videos, I'm going to address those questions. Here are the Tolkien books and Tolkien-related books that I've read. The Lord of the Rings. Here's your first little factoid. It is not actually a trilogy. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings as one book. It was his publishers that forced him to break it up into smaller pieces. I've read The Lord of the Rings over 30 times. I'm proud to say it. And quite frankly, with no exaggeration, it gets better every single time. The Silmarillion. I've read this 9 times. The Hobbit, I have read, this might surprise some of you, only 3 times actually. The beautiful history of The Lord of the Rings. This goes and shows all the manuscript history, or at least a lot of it. It was edited by his son, Christopher Tolkien. Tolkien, A Celebration, edited by Joseph Pierce. This is a number of articles and essays written by various authors, all talking about Tolkien and his work. A biography on Tolkien by Michael White. Paul Kocher, this is one of the famous ones. It's called The Fiction of Tolkien, Master of Middle-earth. It's a very famous work, been around for a long time. One of my favorites by Patrick Curry called Defending Middle-earth. Tolkien on film, essays on Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. These are a bunch of essays written about the films. This one here, this is a biggie. Tolkien wrote a lot of letters. Remember that he lived in the time before there was email, and he hand wrote a ton of letters. He actually typed them up before he would send them. For Tolkien fans, his letters are absolutely essential reading, and they're fascinating. The Unfinished Tales. These are stories that were written by Tolkien. They were never published, but they follow and fall into different time periods of Tolkien's Middle-earth. Humphrey Carpenter wrote the actual authorized biography of Tolkien. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. It follows him all the way from his parents straight through to the day he died. This one here, Author of the Century. This one is a really cool one. The Complete Tolkien Companion by J.R.R. Tyler. This is like, it's kind of like a Middle-earth dictionary Understanding Lord of the Rings. This is another collection of essays written by various authors. The morality of Lord of the Rings, or heroism in the Lord of the Rings, different literary elements. It's also a great one. This is a really cool one, that Tolkien's, the maps of Tolkien's Middle-earth. The writing by Sibley is not my favorite, but the maps, to be quite honest with you, I like John Howe a lot, but I feel like they rushed this project. I'm not a super huge fan of this. Her name is Karen Wynne Fonstad, and she wrote the Atlas of Middle-earth, and she goes through in excruciating detail showing, you know, different map locations from Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, etc., for staying up late at night and matching as you're reading Lord of the Rings, following their footsteps through her atlas. It's great. So you might be wondering, you know, why, Jeremy? Why are you so into Tolkien? And all I can say is, when I first read Tolkien, I was in the middle of college. I was studying philosophy at UCLA, and it was a very busy time of my life. I was working about an hour and a half away from where I was going to school, and I was a full-time student and working, and it was just a very, very stressful time of life, to say the least. And I would come home at night, or maybe take a break from studying, and I would just open up the pages of the Lord of the Rings, and I was literally sucked into that world. I became so enamored by it. It was so exciting and fun and beautiful and wonderful, and the creations that Tolkien came up with were unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. He was so imaginative. All that hype before the movies just kept me going, and it kind of just became this sort of hobby of mine to read about Tolkien, and it's lasted to this very day. So, before I can tell the story of Tolkien, we've got to hear the story of a young 16-year-old boy named Ronald, who was an orphan. His parents, both his mother and father, had died young, and by the time Ronald was only a young teenager, he was an orphan. And he was cared for, him and his older brother, by a Catholic priest named Father Francis. So Ronald, with his older brother, lived in a house, a two-story house, that was kind of like an orphanage. It was for a bunch of orphans, and Ronald had this side room upstairs, and there was this young girl who was actually older than him, though. She was 19, and her name was Edith. And Edith was this beautiful 19-year-old girl who kind of liked Ronald, and they found pretty quickly that they got along really well together. And Ronald, being kind of a mature for his age, and Edith being kind of young for her age, they kind of worked out. And for the next 2 years, Ronald and Edith began to fall in love. Now, Ronald and Edith, they continued this romantic relationship, even to the point where they would kiss from time to time, and they would share with each other secret whistles in the middle of the night. If she would whistle, because she had the room right down below him, he would stick his head out the window and look down, and she'd be looking up at him. And they would talk sometimes all through into the late night hours. Now, it just so happened that after these 2 years, and they had promised to each other, you know, let's get married someday, and I'll stay true to you if you stay true to me, these types of things. But when Ronald turned 18, it just so happened he was a very gifted student. He was doing very well in school, and he actually earned his way to get to go to college at Oxford. Now, Father Francis was very strict, and he told Ronald, he said, Ronald, you are forbidden to see that girl at all while you're in college. So Ronald goes away to school, and before leaving, Ronald tells Edith, he says, I can't talk to you for 3 years, but I promise you I will wait 3 years for you, and as soon as I turn 21, I'm going to come back for you. And she promised him, and you know, they made their goodbyes, and Ronald goes off to college. Now, this might surprise you, because we live in a world today where we don't really listen to, you know, what we're told to do. But Ronald was a very respectful young man, and he stood by his word. He did not once, over those 3 years, he never wrote to Edith, he didn't see Edith, he didn't do anything of the sort. He waited until his 21st birthday. And on the night of his 21st birthday, after midnight, he was in bed, he began writing a letter, and he wrote to Edith, and he said, "I've waited, I want to see you." This is where the story gets really good. And so he gets a letter back a day or two later from Edith, and she says, "Ronald, I'm already engaged to be married to another man." And so you can imagine Ronald was floored. He was completely heartbroken, but you know what? He didn't give up. He said, "Meet me tomorrow." He wrote her another letter. "Meet me at the spot we used to always go." They would go to this coffee shop and drink tea together. So Edith agrees to meet Ronald there in that coffee shop, and looking her in the eye, Ronald says, "I've waited these 3 years for you. Marry me." And Edith, looking back at Ronald, is like, "I'm sorry I got engaged, and you know it's only because I thought you had forgotten about me," and these things. And she was so torn. But that very night, she sent her engagement ring back to that young man. She called off the engagement, and not long after, Ronald and Edith were married. They ended up being married for more than 50 years and had 4 kids. And that Ronald is John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, otherwise known as J.R.R. Tolkien. And lastly, I want to give you my opinion as to which order I think you should read his works in. I think you should start with The Lord of the Rings. The reason is because it's the masterpiece, right? It's the one, it's written for adults, it's rich, it's deep, it's powerful, it's epic, and that will get you, hooked on Middle-earth and the story of hobbits and rings of power and dwarves and elves and all of that. Then next, I would recommend reading The Hobbit and realizing The Hobbit was written for children, and it's much lighter and it's not as deep and rich, and the language is a bit simpler, but it's still fun. So you can just kind of enjoy it as a fun little story that attaches to The Lord of the Rings. And then I would go back and I would read Lord of the Rings again and again and again. And then someday, when you're really feeling up to it, read the Silmarillion. That's the history of elves in Middle-earth, and it goes all the way back to the creation story of where Eru, the god that Tolkien describes, creates Middle-earth, and it's pretty intense. So that's the order that I would recommend you guys read it. The Lord of the Rings, then The Hobbit, then read The Lord of the Rings a ton of times, and then read the Silmarillion. And then if you want to break into the Children of Hurin, and if you want to read the Unfinished Tales and all of that, the world breaks open for you. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I had a lot of fun making it. Please leave me your questions, anything Tolkien related, and I will do my best to answer those questions for you in upcoming Tolkien Talks. Thank you for watching MathomBooks. Have a great time in Booktubia. To talk about Tolkien, the Oxford professor, it's only right that I should don a tie, hence the tie.